Good evening, everyone. Time for episode 17 of the Drums of Doom, part 2 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga by me. Starting on page 212. Okay. So you think that they are gnomes, eh, Kerr said? They look like my people, but they seem older somehow. It is said that the deep gnomes look that way, Kerr said. Life down here is hard and often short. But still you worry, Carmen asked. There are other more dangerous races down here that also could be mistaken for gnomes, Kerr said. It would be better if we could find some way to go around them. We've come so far already. We've long since passed beyond our map. Kalor, can we risk a little light? They're about 200 yards ahead. They might see the light, but only if they are looking directly towards us. I don't think that we have any other choice, Carmen said. What do you think, Kerr? Try the scepter. If we have to fight in our condition, we're in big trouble anyway. Magical light soon illuminated the maze of mining passages, heading off to the four corners all around them. Much as they had feared, the diamond's light pointed south, directly toward the miners. When Kalor commanded the scepter to cease, the dreadful darkness returned. I'll scout ahead, Kalor said. If any of them saw me, they might set an ambush ahead of us. We'll give you a short head start, Kerr said, and then we'll all set out after you. Turning to each of them, he made sure that they all knew that from there on, it was hand and arm signals only. Moving out, they worked their way quietly along as they neared the sounds of mining. A great clamor rung out through the shafts all about them, bringing with it the sounds of horrified screams, and a battle joined. What's happening? Carmen whispered. It sounds like the miners are being attacked. Many residents of the dark would rather steal gold than work for it. Maybe they need help. Maybe, but we must be careful. We might end up between two trolls and their next meal. Carmen moved ahead purposefully. Her helm enhanced vision, allowing her to see well beyond the range of her companion's eyes. Soon she was winding through the twisting passage directly behind Kalor. The tunnel walls sparkled with gems of every facet and color, perfectly formed and beyond every dream of the kings of the surface. Ahead of them, she could hear the workers hammering, digging, and even singing, although she could not understand the words. And then a shadow suddenly loomed, lurking just beyond the next bend. She hurriedly pulled Kalor back with her into the nearest alcove. Something comes. Something big. How big? It has to stoop to avoid the ceiling, she whispered, and it is nearly as wide as the tunnel. His curiosity was at its height. He could not resist peeking around the corner of their hideaway. She couldn't resist holding him back a little. Whatever it was, it had a large heat signature, which he could just begin to see. She pulled him back deeper into the alcove, and her voice was even softer. I can hear its heavy breathing, and it's dragging something. He felt her tremble then, and her firm clasp upon his shoulder and upon her new spear were only slightly reassuring. I'm going to sneak ahead into the next cross-tunnel and hide, Kalor whispered. When he reaches you, strike him fast if it is some enemy. I'll take him from the back. Watching his progress, she could hear his quiet footfalls and then the faint sound of his muffled breathing when he stopped. Beyond him, the huge thing approached, dragging something or some part of itself. Behind them, she could make out the almost deafening sounds of her friend's approach, and louder still was the sound of pitched battle. What could it be, she wondered? In the span of heartbeats, the creature, for a creature it was, had passed by Kalor and entered into the passage between them. Somehow it had not seen him, and so, with great fear, she stepped into the passageway to meet it head on. Vanamwoinen, protect me, she prayed, when she finally saw, but could not recognize, what it was. Kerr increased their pace, with Tarek following close behind him. Their scouts were no longer visible, and the sounds of battle were intense. The time for silence was at an end. Where'd they go? D'Artagnan said. I can't make them out anymore. I don't like it, Leander said. They shouldn't have gone ahead alone. Push on, Dow said. They may be in danger. Maybe we should give them a little more time. But their dilemma soon ended when the terrifying sound of Carmen's strangled battle cry gave them no time to spare. The rush of fear's blood drove away their sickness, but their full strength was lost to them. The next precious moments would decide all. Tarek's new sword was already in his hands, and its blade suddenly rippled with red, magical flames. Kerr prepared his axe, and his comrades readied their swords. Karina paused to retch, but her stomach was already empty. When it was over, she paused to take a breath and then struggled on. One-Eyed Jacks. We didn't have any idea of what we were about to face, Kalo said. We were expecting dwarves or even a mining party of gnomes, but what we found instead was even more at home in those dark corridors. What was it, Kalor? Polly asked. A troll? Or an Etten? Maybe goblins, Eric said, or even a giant. All of those thoughts passed through our minds, and indeed, we would have welcomed such familiar beasts, but none of us had ever seen or heard of such monsters before. Kerr knew them by an ancient name, and they had not been seen by any of his kin for centuries. They were an ancient horror, a throwback to another age, a time long before men or dwarves were born. Unfortunately for Carmen and me, he was still far behind us in the adjoining tunnel. What did you do? Garrett said. Did Carmen slay the beast with her mighty spear? It is a story that parches my lips with a terrible thirst, I said. Sonia, would you please refill my flagon? A cool drink and the chill of my old horror passed just enough for me to begin again. It was a time of torment for us all, but I will tell you the tale as fully as I can remember it. Huge they were, over 8 feet tall and half as wide. In form, they resembled the mighty ants of the southern jungles, but they stood upright upon 4 limbs, with their torsos held tall like a man's or a centaur's. Their upper arms were long and slender, with hairy pincers that could grasp, as well as we discovered, wield weapons of war. Excuse me. Their heads were large, like a bear's, with bulbous oval eyes, long sickle-like mandibles, and 2 antennae that never ceased to writhe, always seeking, sensing, divining. A glistening black, rock-hard exoskeleton covered their entire body, from the top of their heads to the tip of their segmented abdomen. Their power and speed was unknown to us, but we would learn it soon enough. Better that we had never met them. Better that Carmen had not been the first among us to face them. Ants that hunt men. Vanemoinen, she cried, hoping that evoking his name would bring her courage and gain the beast's attention. When first she saw it, she wished that she had never seen it. Her imagination could never have conjured such an image. Her most terrible nightmare would never even have dreamed it. She gasped, fighting for breath, for strength. Her pulse was quick, her palms wet. The Ant-Man, for that is what it seemed, was unsurprised, even, it seemed, expecting her. In its right pincer, one of the small gnomes struggled. With a casual strength, it smashed him against the tunnel wall until he stopped moving. Dropping him to the tunnel floor and piled the dirty... With a casual strength, it smashed him against the tunnel wall until he stopped moving, dropped him to the tunnel floor, and piled the dirty sack on top of him. Looking up in her direction, it stared at her defiantly, and even in the purple world of her visor's magical vision, the Ant-Man's eyes glowed with an inner savagery. It was then that it uttered a piercing screech, followed by a symphonic alien chatter. Its calls to its brethren echoed through the halls. Grasping at something behind its back, it pulled out a thick-handled spear, tipped with stone, and charged her. Despite her fear, Carmen had fought creatures of such size before, and she intended to set her spear for its rush and skewer it. The tunnel floor was smooth, and she doubted that the weight of her boot could hold the butt of her spear firmly enough. But the tunnel way provided few irregularities for her to set her spear against, and forced her to set her spear against the thick wooden roof support. In a flash, it was upon her. She raised her spear at the final moment. Aiming her thrust perfectly, the creature struck it with the full impact of its rush. If she had been familiar with its stone-like shell, she might have tried something else, for her spear point only dug in a little. Its handle bowing wide and shattering to splinters in her hands. Unprepared for the utter failure of her weapon, she reached for her sword's handle and struck a hammering blow to the head. A second hit drove her back into the wall. The Ant-Man's mandibles encircled her helm and lifted her skyward. Another strike blasted the air from her lungs and she vomited. With a hideous screech, the Ant-Man lifted her skyward and bashed her against the tunnel roof. When she stopped flailing, he brought her back to eye level and examined his prize. Antenna waving victoriously, he was obviously happy with his catch and promise of a filling meal. Kalor left his hiding place the moment the Ant-Man charged. If the creature had been as wary as was its norm, it would surely have sensed his approach, for its senses were without equal in Under-Earth. Nevertheless, Kalor went unnoticed, and his silent approach was unexpected. Quietly drawing his small sword, he padded closer, taking several swift steps and leaping after the last. In a double-handed overhead thrust, he aimed for what he thought might be the creature's spine, but instead he struck some sort of equipment that formed closely to its body. He struck again and hit its hard shell. The Ant-Man reared back suddenly and threw him. He tumbled backward onto the floor. He landed well, allowing the roll to absorb his momentum until it came to a quite abrupt and inopportune end against the tunnel wall. He picked himself up, bruised, battered, and stood facing the creature. It had completely abandoned Carmen and was now concentrating solely upon him. It was a feeling that he was quite uncomfortable with. During his fall, he had dropped his sword and it lay on the floor behind it. He would never be able to reach it safely, so he drew his two gnomish daggers. Reversing his grip for a right-handed throw, he drew back, but a sudden, intense light blinded him. The creature lurched violently, its body racked. His Cloud Seeker's arrows burned into it, penetrating deeply beneath its exoskeleton. It was torn now. Kill the meddlesome little pest, or return to finish off its new attacker. Carmen was down, but not down for good. She felt wretched. Her own bile clouded her visor, but she could still see. Tarek had taught her how to play possum, and now her helm-guided vision allowed her to send her arrows into the beast. The Ant-Man was powerful, confident in its resilience, but against this power he was vulnerable. It looked for cover, but could find none. It tried to evade and advance, but still barbs of light burned it. Its strength was failing. Without options, it chose to escape over its least dangerous foe. Batting Kalor aside, it rushed down the hall. Sighting down the pale, glowing light of a mystical arrow, Carmen fired as rapidly as her arms would allow. Some inner sense told her when to release, even how to release, in a combination that targeted the most vulnerable areas of the creature's body. The tunnel flashed brilliantly as each shot streaked into its hulking form. The Ant-Man struggled to escape. If only it could reach the others, it thought, as a searing pain briefly touched its mind. Tumbling into a lifeless heap, it twitched for a while and then moved no more. Moving closer to make sure, Carmen could hear the frantic footsteps of her approaching friends. A small man that looked much like Kalor lay against the left wall, Kalor opposite him. The gnome, if he was one, was twisted, broken, and quite dead. Kalor was unconscious but alive. Kneeling beside him, she tried to rouse him with the last of her water. "Where am I?" he muttered. "That thing gave you quite a slap." "Oh," he said, holding his head between his hands. "My head hurts." "Carmen," Tarek said, "are you all okay?" "My ribs are cracked and my head's ringing, but we'll make it. Just a moment," she said. "Mew arm." Removing her helm, she emptied its contents onto the floor and proceeded to dry heave for some time, each convulsion causing an explosion of pain. When her nausea subsided, she wiped off her face and cleaned her helm as best she could. Donning it, she commanded, "Elvanira," and she could see. Dark cloth, and it sealed to her neck, helping her breathe. Standing tall brought more pain, but her inner soldier was in command now. As long as she wasn't dead, she could still fight. I'm ready. We'd better get moving if we're going to find anyone left alive. Who's this guy? Dartin said, pointing his sword toward the corpse beside them. Looks just like Kalor. One of the miners, I guess, Leander said. Strange, Kerr said. He carries no weapons, nor even a knife sheath. Maybe they are near to home. Or else he's a slave, Dow said. No mining party they have ever seen goes so completely unarmed, Kerr said. These miners may not be friends. What the hell is that thing? Korg Trogan, Kerr said. Ants that hunt men. If they catch you, they bring you back to their colony to feed to their young. Better to take your own life than to let that happen. A tough way to go, Dartin said. We better hurry, Kalor said, somewhat recovered as he picked up his sword. The battle is going on without us, and it is there that we'll find our answers. Staying together, they regrouped as best they could, Dartin carrying Karina, who was barely conscious and could walk no further. It was only a matter of hours before the rest of them would join her. The gnomes were fighting bravely in a great vaulted chamber. Torches burned in many sconces, randomly placed about the area. Many random tunnels entered the cave at all angles like honeycomb. Several gnomes lay dead or dying upon the floor, some of them being dragged away by ant-men. The surviving gnomes were being led by a stout, black-bearded captain, wielding 2 even swords with determined skill. Around him was a tightly formed phalanx of 20, battling with short swords and mining picks. Their armor was black and well made, although some of them were plain-clothed. Several carts filled with ore lay about the room, some of them overturned. 4 of the ant-men lay dead or dying about them, but 10 more remained, either fighting the gnomes or dragging off the fallen. Hurry, Carmen said. They need our help. Her longsword drawn, she led the way into the war-torn cave. Tarek ran beside her, his blade's edge bathed in mystical red flame. Kerr followed closely behind them. Slinging his shield, he drew his offhand blade. The more that he saw what was around him, the more his suspicions grew. Behind him, Dartin found cover behind an overturned cart. Gently laying Karina inside it, he prepared his bow. Leander ran beside Kerr, raising his sword high. A tremendous thunderclap issued forth and black clouds began to form. Dow ran in last behind them, surveying the scene. He broke away left with Leander. Kalor paused, calling upon a spell that he knew. Dartin chanted a prayer for battle. Upon my shield stares Odin's sacrifice. With our hands and hearts we strike, to fall bravely in battle well fought, standing once again beside Odin at Ragnarok. The battling gnomes seemed to fight with renewed vigor when they saw that reinforcements would soon reach them. Lashing out frantically against the ant-men, they seemed to be experts in fighting the huge creatures. Rotating in teams of 3, they would harass the ant-men from multiple angles, hoping that one of them would be able to strike some vital area. It was a tactic that seemed to be working, for 2 more ant-men soon fell, but occasionally one of the gnomes would go down beneath a mighty blow, and some of them did not rise again. To me, Carmen cried. Tarek ran 2 swords lengths to her right. To me, Carmen cried. Tarek ran 2 swords lengths to her right, his right hand grasping the hilt of his sword of flame, yet he was unburned. I'm right behind you, Kerr shouted. Dow and Leander took the left flank. Moving quickly, they set upon one of the ant-men. She was a soldier, past the pain. All was attack, all was fury. Rushing in, she engaged the ant-man, battling the gnome's captain. The creature slipped left, trying to limit its exposed flank. Driving back the gnome with a great thrust, it turned to face her. Twisting its head in defiance, its mandibles opened wide. It knew nothing of these new enemies. All that it knew was that the time to flee for its life had come. Stepping onto the bodies of some unfortunate, mortally wounded gnomes, it crouched for a leap. Carmen's fighting skill was both a combination of training, insight, and great adaptability. She had learned just how strong these creatures were in her last fight. She suspected that they were both primitive and savage. With her sword held low, she waited, hoping it would either leap over her or bridge the gap between them in an attempt to crush her beneath the bulk of its body. By some stroke of luck, it tried to leap past her. When it was airborne, she sidestepped. Wielding her sword two-handed, she brought her sword's tip to bear against its lower abdomen. Once it had left the earth, it couldn't change direction. Her blade bit deeply into its vitals. The Ant-Man landed in a devastating tumble, its life-blood spewing forth thick and green. Running it down, she thrust her sword hard into the base of its head. It shuddered and soon lay still. Turning to view the battle, she again saw the gnome's captain. The look that he gave her left her with an uncomfortable chill. I'm going to stop here for episode 17. We'll take up 18 where I left off. Sorry, folks, I'm just too tired to continue. So that's where we'll leave off. And as always, read The Drums of Doom, Part 2 of the Duaredheim Staff Saga, and all of the following novels. Thank you and have a great night.